I take the privilege to request you, Madam, to kindly address the congregation.
Jai Jagannath, esteemed chief guest of the occasion, Sri Purushottam Rupala ji, the guest of honor, Dr. Thui, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda, Professor Padhi, Upendra Padhi sir, and Professor Patit Pavan Mishra on the dais, and all the erudite scholars, researchers in this August gathering. Actually, when Professor Padhi gave me a request to come to the valedictory session, I was very much apprehensive because history is not my domain, real domain, because since my school days, I have left studying history. So it is really a very difficult task for me to talk on history because my parent domain is sociology. But I became really interested, and when I was hearing to Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda sir and Professor Pratit Pavan Mishra sir about the deliberations that took place for the last 3 days, it is really alluring that our history is a very rich history. So, when I teach in my class globalization, I always quote a Belgian economic historian. He is none other than Herman van der Wee, who says that globalization, which we are talking in the early of 1980s, actually is a new phrase for an old process. And as Professor Nanda was telling, because of Eurocentrism, because of our West-centric bias, we always say that the colonial countries were the pioneers in the process of globalization. But when I was listening to all these things and I was just browsing some articles, I found I can say Kalinga was a forerunner in the process of globalization. Because if we say, and when globalization comes, because Kalinga could start with what we say is the cross-border intrusions. It was not the Britishers. Much before the Britishers came, Kalinga started because of its indigenous knowledge, because of its rich culture, it had got that courage to go to the outside land. And when we talk about that conference theme was Kalinga Southeast Asia and civilizational link. A civilization is never built in a day. It takes ages to build a civilization, and it is the culture which plays a very, very important role in changing the civilization. And in this context, I will say the Kalinga culture was very rich. And when we say 3 important things actually galvanize civilization, they are the mercantile trades. The second one is the maritime explorations, and the third one is migration. And if we see, Kalinga had got the 3 things with it, and the monarchs, merchants, and the missionaries, not the Christian missionaries I'm talking about the missionaries, the Buddhists, the Jains, and the Hindus who had gone outside the national border, and they were the people who established these civilizational linkages. And since 2,800 years, South Asian group of islands had close contact with the Kalingans. I am talking about the Kalingans, then the Indians will come. And the maiden impulse to the colonizing activity and expansion of India had its origin in the daring spirit of the Kalingas. Because the Kalingans had a very daring spirit, we cannot say that they were subdued, but due to because history was written mainly by the Westerners, and Indian history came, the Indian historians came much later. They are actually eclipsed in the world history. When we are talking about globalization, this conference, when I was preparing for this conference, this gave me a realization. I will now start with Kalinga was one of the pioneers in the process of globalization. When I was telling that the cities of Rome, the China, the Silk Route, and all this, before that, Kalinga had many things to share. And Kalinga had a lion's share in the overseas expansion and colonization. The naval power of Kalinga made it possible for her to establish kingdoms in Southeast Asia in the early stages of colonization, and finally a great empire during the Middle Ages. And tradition holds that 20,000 families were sent from Kalinga to Java by Prince of Kalinga, and their number multiplied, and they prospered there. So the second thing was that the geopolitical location of Kalinga, and the geopolitical location of Kalinga was also, and the morphological condition, because it was rich with natural resources, and the entire coastal belt gave it the ascendancy over other places. And therefore, what happened that the Kalingans had much to trade. They had a surplus economy long years back when we were talking about subsistence economy. So this surplus economy wanted them to expand their markets, and and the coastal belt gave them, was very conducive to them. And you know that Kalinga was the citadel of Buddhism, Jainism, and these people, they wanted Ashoka, wanted to spread it outside, and these people went outside to spread these things. So all these things were actually responsible for creating the linkage, and Kalinga had, and Indian linkage culture has a great reflection in the South Asian culture. If you see the languages, if you see the names, if you see the monasteries, if you see the temples, many times you find the essence of the Kalinga in all these things. And we really take the pride, and therefore, and we find that in this perspective, when the immigrants, they actually migrated and married to the women of the localities, they entrenched into the culture of their countries. And you know, the society is patriarchal. And it was the man's culture which was dominating, and they were marrying to the women of that particular locality, as a result of which the culture was also creeping into the South Asian contours, geographical contours. And these 3 days, I know that you had very mind-blowing sessions, and it was actually, it must be, you had 5 plenary sessions, as I understood from Professor Mishra's deliberations. And what I want to tell here is that the deliberations should not end with the presentation of papers, but it should give you, as Professor Nanda was telling, food for thought. We should think what more we can do. There is a geographical marginalization, as someone was telling, local marginalization. The little traditions needs historical documentation. And once the local traditions will have a local historical documentation, and particularly language, if it can be translated into the other languages, even into English, then it will have a spread, and we can not only talk about Kalinga South Asian linkage in this auditorium, it will go beyond this, it will reach the people. Again, we will again rekindle our memories of our linkage, and our linkage will get strengthened, and it will be actually, the unheard story can be heard. With this, I just wrap up my speech. Thank you. Thank you.